They said her face could stop a clock and kill a horse at the same time. They said even the devil would turn away from her. For 3 long years, the people of Dust Creek laughed when she walked by. They threw stones at her feet. They spat in the dirt beside her shadow. And every day, she wore a burlap sack over her head, so no one would have to see the monster they believed lived beneath it. On October 12, 1884, the sun burned hot over the Montana Territory. Dust Creek looked like any other small western town, with wooden boardwalks, a crooked saloon, a bank that stood proud in the center, and a church that leaned slightly to one side from years of wind. But there was something rotten in that town, something that showed itself every afternoon, like a cruel show put on for sport. In front of Jediah's saloon, a young woman knelt on her hands and knees scrubbing the wooden boards with gray soap water. Her dress was rough cotton, faded and stained from work. Her hands were cracked and red, but no one looked at her hands. No one looked at her dress. Every eye fixed on the sack tied tight around her head. The burlap was old and dirty. 2 rough holes were cut for eyes. A small slit allowed her to breathe. The twine around her neck rubbed her skin raw. "Move faster, sackface!" Tobias Roach shouted from the porch. He was a tall, unwashed man who smelled worse than the animals he tended. He kicked over her bucket, sending filthy water spilling across the boards she had just cleaned. The men around him roared with laughter. Abigail Fletcher did not cry. She did not speak. She picked up the bucket, refilled it, and began again. Inside the sack, at her breath came heavy and hot. The air smelled of old cloth and fear. She was 24 years old, though grief had made her feel much older. She had worn the sack for 3 years, ever since the fire. 3 years earlier, the orphanage on the edge of town had burned in the middle of the night. Flames had swallowed the wooden building while children screamed inside. The town needed someone to blame. Clayton Hayes, the richest man in Dust Creek, said he saw Abigail near the building with a lantern. He said her face had been burned so badly that it would frighten children for life. He told the town he had shown her mercy by allowing her to work off the damage, as long as she kept her face covered. The town believed him. It was easier that way. "Witch," Tobias muttered as he stepped down from the porch, but his spur pressed into the back of Abigail's calf. She gasped and curled inward to protect herself. The laughter grew louder. Then it stopped. The silence moved down the street like a cold wind. A horse approached from the far end of town. It was a massive animal, taller than any in Dust Creek. Its coat was dark and glossy. The rider sat high in the saddle, broad-shouldered and still. Elias Conincade had come down from the mountains. People in Dust Creek knew the name. They spoke it in low voices. He lived alone in a cabin high in the peaks, trading furs twice a year. Some said he had tracked a cougar with a broken leg. Others said he had fought off a grizzly with nothing but a knife. He was not a man who feared much. He pulled his horse to a stop in front of the saloon. The animal stamped once, hard enough to shake the boards. Elias did not look at Tobias. He did not look at the men laughing. His eyes rested on the woman kneeling in the dirt, with a sack on her head. "Get up," he said. His voice was deep and steady. It was not loud, but it carried. Tobias stepped forward. "She's working, mountain man. That's the town freak." Elias slowly turned his head toward Tobias. His eyes were gray like winter stone. "I wasn't talking to you." He looked back at Abigail. "I said get up." Abigail rose slowly. She held the rag close to her chest. Through the small eye holes, she saw only a tall shadow blocking the sun. Elias flipped a silver dollar toward her. It landed in the dirt at her feet. "Water my horse." A murmur spread through the crowd. A silver dollar was more money than she had touched in years. She can't touch that horse, Jediah barked from the doorway. She's cursed. Elias swung down from the saddle. He landed softly for a man his size. If she can scrub your floors, she can hold a rein, he said. His hand rested lightly on the handle of the large knife at his hip. And if another man speaks to her while she works, he'll wish he hadn't. No one answered. Abigail bent and picked up the coin. It felt heavy and real in her palm. She led the horse to the trough. The animal did not shy away from her. It lowered its head and drank calmly. From the window of the bank across the street, Clayton Hayes watched. His sharp eyes narrowed. He did not like losing control. That night, the saloon was loud with music and smoke. Elias sat alone in a corner with his back to the wall. A glass of whiskey rested untouched in front of him. Every few minutes, Abigail entered through the back door, carrying crates or coal. Jediah shouted at her. Once he shoved her hard enough that she stumbled. Elias watched. When Abigail dropped a heavy keg and fell to her knees, Jediah raised his hand to strike her. He never finished the motion. Elias caught his wrist mid-air. "Let her be," Elias said quietly. "This is town business," Jediah snapped. "She's paying a debt." "Debt?" Elias asked. Clayton Hayes stepped forward from the shadows. He wore a fine suit and a gold watch chain. "She owes $5,000 for burning down the orphanage," Clayton said smoothly. "She works until it's paid." Elias looked at Abigail. He saw bruises on her arms. He saw the raw skin around her neck. "5,000, Elias repeated. "That's right," Clayton said with a smile. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He emptied it onto a table. Gold dust and nuggets spilled out in a bright pile. Gasps filled the room. 6,000, Elias said. "Weigh it." Clayton's smile faded. "I'm buying her debt," Elias continued. "She leaves with me." "You can't," Jediah protested. "She's a monster." Elias walked to Abigail and knelt before her. He did not touch the sack. He took her hand instead. "Stand up," he said softly. She did. "She comes with me at first light," Elias told the room. "Anyone tries to stop us will regret it." Outside, under the cool night sky, Abigail finally spoke to him. "Why?" she whispered. "I don't like traps," Elias answered, "and I don't leave living things in them." They left Dust Creek before sunrise. The journey into the mountains lasted 3 days, but the land rose slowly from dry valley to pine-covered hills. The air grew colder and cleaner. Abigail kept the sack on at all times. Even when they stopped by streams, she turned her back before lifting the cloth to drink. Elias did not try to see her face. On the second night, they sat by a small fire. "Why did you really pay for me?" she asked. Elias stared into the flames. "Did you start the fire?" he asked. "No," she said. "I woke to smoke. Clayton was outside watching. After, he showed me a mirror. My face was ruined, melted. He said the town would never survive seeing it." "When was the last time you looked in a mirror?" Elias asked. 3 years ago." He nodded slowly. The next afternoon they reached his cabin. It stood on a ledge high above the valley. Snow touched the distant peaks. For the first time in years, Abigail felt quiet around her. Days passed. She cooked and cleaned. Elias hunted and chopped wood. He brought her wildflowers and left them on the table without comment. One night, as snow fell outside, Elias looked at her across the fire. "It's hot in here," he said gently. "You can take it off." "I can't," she whispered. "You'll hate me." "I've seen worse than any face," he replied. "Nothing under that sack will scare me." Her hands trembled as they moved to the twine at her neck. She loosened the knot. The twine fell away. She lifted the sack slightly, exposing her chin to the firelight. Then the cabin door exploded inward. A rifle shot cracked through the air. Elias fell backward, blood spreading across his shoulder. 3 armed men rushed inside. Abigail screamed as one of them struck her to the floor. Silas Vane stepped forward, rifle in hand. "Mr. Hayes wants his property back," he said with a cruel grin. Flames began to rise in the corner as oil soaked into the floor. They dragged Abigail into the snow. Inside the burning cabin, Elias lay bleeding on the floor. And as the fire climbed the walls around him, the mountain man opened his eyes. He was not dead yet. The fire swallowed the cabin in a roar of orange and black. Sparks flew into the blizzard like angry stars. Elias lay half buried in the snow a few yards from the door, his shoulder burning and freezing at the same time. Every breath cut like a knife in his chest. For a moment, he let himself close his eyes. He saw Abigail standing on the platform in Dust Creek, with stones flying at her feet. He saw her lifting the sack just enough to drink water. He saw her hands shaking as she loosened the twine. Then he saw Silas Vane's grin. Elias forced his eyes open. The storm howled around him. The men were gone. Abigail was gone. He rolled onto his side and screamed as pain shot through his shoulder. The bullet had torn through muscle and bone. Blood soaked his buckskin coat and froze at the edges. "Get up," he growled to himself. He dragged his body across the snow until he reached a low rock shelf that blocked the wind. Yet he pressed his back against it and used his teeth to rip a strip from his shirt. With shaking fingers, he packed snow against the wound to slow the bleeding, then tied the cloth tight around his shoulder. His vision blurred, but he did not faint. Elias Conincade had buried a brother in these mountains. He had survived avalanches and hunger and fever. He would survive this. He pushed himself to his feet. The wind had nearly erased the tracks, but he knew the path down the southern ridge. Silas would not risk another route in a storm like this. They would take the mule and ride hard for Dust Creek. Elias began to walk. Each step felt like stepping on broken glass. His left arm hung useless. Snow stung his face, but anger kept him moving. Not loud anger, not wild anger. A cold, steady anger that burned deep. They had taken her back to the cage. They had set fire to the only home she had known without fear. They had called her property. The storm lasted 2 days. Silas and his men rode hard, but they did not show kindness. At night, they tied Abigail to a tree and left her outside the tent. The burlap sack froze stiff around her face. Her wrists bled where the rope bit into her skin. "You're lucky we don't hang you on the spot," one of the men muttered. Abigail did not answer. She stopped crying sometime during the second night. The tears had frozen against the cloth and made her face ache. Her body felt numb, but her mind burned. "Elias is dead," she told herself. "You brought him ruin." By the time they reached Dust Creek, the sky was clear. The town bustled as usual. People stopped what they were doing when they saw the riders. "They got her!" someone shouted. Silas tipped his hat like a hero returning from battle. They cut Abigail down from the mule and pushed her toward the center of town. She stumbled, her legs weak. Clayton Hayes waited on the porch of the sheriff's office, calm as always. His suit was pressed. His shoes shone. "Welcome home, Abigail," he said softly. "You killed him," she whispered. Clayton smiled. "I corrected a mistake." They did not put her in a jail cell. Instead, they locked her in the old iron cage in the center of the square, the same cage once used for drunks and wild dogs. Children gathered around, Men leaned on posts and watched. Women whispered behind gloved hands. "Take off the sack," a boy yelled. "Show us the monster," another called. Clayton raised a hand. "Not yet. Tomorrow we hold a hearing. But the town deserves proof." For 2 days, Abigail sat inside that cage. She barely ate. She barely slept. The town treated her like a show. On the second night, when the square was quiet, Clayton approached alone. Moonlight shone on the iron bars. "Why?" Abigail asked through the sack. "Why ruin my life?" Clayton stood close, his shadow falling across her. "Because you were in my way," he said simply. "I never hurt you." "No," he agreed. "But your mother did." Abigail froze. "Your mother owned this valley," Clayton continued. "Every acre. When she died, the land passed to you. I managed it while you were a child. I built the bank. I built this town. But when you turned 21, the control should have returned to you." "That's not true," Abigail whispered. "It is," Clayton replied. "Unless you were unfit, right, or dead." Her stomach dropped. "The fire," she breathed. "A necessary event," Clayton said. "I needed the town to fear you. I needed you to hide. A monster cannot claim land." Abigail gripped the bars. "My face," she said. "Is it ruined?" Clayton's eyes gleamed. "Does it matter? You believe it. They believe it." He stepped back. "Tomorrow, I declare you insane. You go to an asylum. You vanish. And Dust Creek remains mine." He walked away. Abigail sank to her knees inside the cage. For 3 years, she had lived in shame. 3 years, she had believed she was broken. Now she did not know what was real. She did not see the figure moving across the rooftops. Elias reached Dust Creek after midnight. He was pale and shaking. His shoulder throbbed with infection, but he had taken a revolver from a drunk passed out behind the livery stable. 5 bullets remained in the chamber. He saw the cage. He saw Abigail curled inside. Something inside him went still. He needed chaos. The dry goods store stood near the bank. Barrels of kerosene lined the back wall. Elias slipped inside, smashed a lantern against the wood, and stepped away as flames climbed fast. Sunday morning arrived with smoke already hanging in the air. The church bells rang. A platform had been built beside the cage. The whole town gathered. Men stood shoulder to shoulder. Women clutched their children. Clayton Hayes stepped onto the platform holding a Bible. "Citizens of Dust Creek," he called, "we gather to deal with a danger among us." Deputies dragged Abigail from the cage. She stumbled up the steps. "He removed the covering," Clayton ordered. Silas grabbed her arms. The sheriff reached for the twine. An explosion shook the square. The dry goods store burst into flame. Glass shattered outward. Horses screamed and broke loose. People turned in panic. A single shot rang out. Silas jumped back as a bullet struck the wood near his boots. Elias stood in the street, smoke behind him, revolver raised. He looked like a man returned from the grave. His coat was burned at the edges. His face was pale with fever. His left arm was bound tight to his chest. "Kincaid," Silas hissed. Elias fired again. The sheriff's hat flew off his head. The crowd scattered. Elias moved toward the platform step by step. Silas drew his weapon. Elias spun and fired twice more. One bullet struck Silas in the shoulder. He fell with a curse. Yet the revolver clicked empty. Elias tossed it aside and drew his knife. He climbed the platform. Clayton backed away, his face white. "You should be dead," Clayton stammered. "I don't die easy," Elias replied. He turned to Abigail. "Trust me," he said softly. The fire crackled in the distance. The crowd stood frozen. Elias reached for the twine at her neck. She shook her head. "Don't. He lied to you," Elias said. With steady hands, he untied the knot. The burlap sack fell into his hand. The town held its breath. The burlap sack slipped from Abigail's head and landed softly on the wooden boards of the platform.